Hello and welcome to another National Road Safety Partnership Program webinar, the Essential Energy Road Safety Journey. My name is Jerome Carslake, for those who haven't come across me at all. I manage the National Road Safety Partnership Program. Next slide, please, Chris. And I manage its many activities. That's me right there. So if you want to find out more about what NRSP is or what we're doing, please go check out our website and do register for the newsletter as well to be kept up to date. Today's session, it's going to go for approximately 60 minutes. And we'll be looking at taking questions throughout. We've got two slide points through it where we can sort of have focus on that, and we'll have a good chunk at the end. So we're going to be recording the session today, and it's going to be shared through the NRSP website. So please, if you have questions, throw them through. Chris is ready to go. Talking about that, we'd love to have your input. And so this is how you go about doing it for those for the first time here. Please submit your questions in there. I'll fire them at Chris as they come along, and they may be actually answered a bit later on in the webinar as well. If not, please just prompt me, and we'll try and get through as many questions as we can, but as always, we only have an hour, so we may not be able to get through them all. And now, our lucky presenter who's joining me today is flown all the way down from New South Wales, I should say, and he was just commenting on how it's so much worse down in Melbourne. So we're lucky to have Chris Stew, Fleet Manager for Essential Energy, with me today. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Jerome. Thanks, and good afternoon to everyone. I thought I'd start today with a little of who we are at Essential Energy. We are a distribution service network provider that looks after regional, rural, and remote New South Wales. The slide that you can see up in front of you quite clearly has front and centre our purpose, which is what we stand for, and that is to enable energy solutions that improve life for the customers in our franchise area. If we do that really well, we will empower communities to share energy for a better tomorrow, which is very, very important given the conditions we're in. A little of, well, further to who we are our values, which is the way we go about things, and very, very first there is make safety your own, which is a key value across our entire business, and one that we'll spend a bit of time talking about today. Being easy to do business with and making every dollar count are also key objectives of our entire business. That's both internally and externally, because we are there for all of our customers and members of our franchise area. And as always, we are courageous and shape the future. And we do that honestly and inclusively and supportively.
So I guess with that safety point there, making every dollar count, like safety doesn't really cost you that much money. Like, it shouldn't be something which you're outlaying. It's more of an investment. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, Jerome. So safety is an absolute investment, not only an investment for our company as such, but an investment for everyone that's impacted by our business operations, whether that be the person who consumes power as a member of our franchise, or someone who happens to be passing through as a tourist, because we share the roads with them as well. So yes, very much an investment. A little bit more about who we are. We are one of Australia's largest distribution network, and particularly the service providers of that network. And this graphic actually shows our network as such. It does highlight very, very clearly one of our biggest challenges, which is our customer density. We have a very, very low customer density, which naturally means we cover quite a large geographical area, and some of the statistics on the side there I'm not planning to read through. But certainly, definitely catch to the eye. The one I will call attention to is 40 million kilometres travelled by our employees each year, which is a staggering number, and certainly something that is a key feature of our entire business.
That's a massive footprint. So how do you balance, like, is electricity your key risk, or is it road safety, or am I just picking between the two of them?
There's a number of key risks across our business, Jeremy. The one that gets the most attention, I would say, is electricity, but it is certainly not there as our primary risk. Certainly, road travel in its entirety and motor vehicle activities is a massive risk for our entire business. By exposure, by every metric, exposure, time, risk, statistically, it far outweighs many of the other risks in our businesses. But one of the things that I will say is that as a business, when we are great at managing to those values, and particularly become great risk managers, the nature of the risk almost becomes innate, and we will manage everything in the same way.
Just looking at this, I guess a lot of your workers reside in the community which they service. I'm a country boy, so I really understand that from WA originally. So how do you balance, I guess, a lot of these people when power goes down or something happens, how do you balance their enthusiasm to restore power to their country peers and managing that safety? And then also, how are they going to get home safely at night?
Yeah, it's a massive challenge, Jerome, especially when we have short notice outages. It's we ask an incredible amount of our field workers, and quite often the field workers are the ones fielding everything from physical interactions with the customers, complaints at times, and certainly compliments when the power comes back on, all the way through to planned works and construction. So it is quite the challenge. Certainly, walking around any one of our depots or installations, looking at an entirely mobile workforce, we must remember to manage that risk right from the beginning of the day through to the end, and that's something that's very big across our entire organisation. That when we start shift, when we take the first activity, that's when the risk starts, not when we attend the line.
And what about your people when they're out? I guess they're a really public face part of the image. Do they receive much in the way of positive, negative from the community they're in as well at the time when people are out and about?
Yes, absolutely. Every time we're out in the community, we're a representation of our business and everything that we stand for. So certainly when we talk about vision, purpose, and values, that's on show every single day. Every team member in our organisation is acutely aware of that, and that's where it's very important to certainly my team, the entire business, that we're making sure that we are on point at all times, and certainly providing not only service but good quality customer advice when we're out in the field as well. Very good. Stepping down into a little bit more detail to cover this franchise area, we have roughly 3,500 mobile assets. That's the introduction of that terminology, mobile assets, which is something we'll get into a lot more from here on in. They're highly specialised, and they definitely have unique service environments. A few of the images on this slide depict some of the challenges that not only our assets but also our field teams face on a daily and monthly and annual basis. The assets themselves obviously have a high physical and safety risk, but they also have a financial, reputational, and business risk. So they encompass quite a lot of risk for our business. We have high reliability and performance requirements, particularly in those short notice events. That's something that we have to stand by our gear and make sure it's there. And it's also, and for that reason, very sensitive to service level and return times. What we found, certainly going back 2 years now, we actually did some study of our fleet assets and how they were going. Certainly, we saw deviations in performance and risk, and certainly in cost, and that moves us on to the next slide, where very quickly and very rapidly what we came to the realization that our fleet function as such was largely a services orientated function, and a few of the statements on this slide really talk about the services that function offered, which was largely transactional, like for like, very single direction almost. You can see there the shift that we're moving towards, which is it's fleet asset management. We know it as mobile asset management, and it talks about management of assets across the entire life cycle, which certainly starts at identifying design, building and preparing them well, recovering the maximum value, whatever that value be defined as, whether that be risk or performance orientated across their life cycle. And then when we renew them, we renew and learn to make sure that we're continually designing the best assets. So certainly asset management as a discipline talks about the balancing of the three interdependent levers, which is cost, risk, and performance. And you can see those down the bottom there. So the fleet transformation inside of Essential Energy largely focus on moving to this new operating model, which is why we're here talking today.
Well, what was the driving imperative for that? Where did that come from?
The driving imperative started with that analysis. We had quite a lot of not only statistical but in-field and anecdotal reports that certainly risk management across that portfolio wasn't being well handled, and certainly performance. And I'm sure I share the line with a lot of people at the moment here that there's no shortage of performance complaints. We we did have a solid handle naturally on our financial performance, but the other two levers as such weren't really managed. So we spent a bit of time doing some navel gazing, doing some investigation into the function as such, and rapidly realised that all of the symptoms that we were seeing were all part and parcel of the same root cause.
And where did the drive come from? Did it come from the grassroots, middle management, leadership, or was it a nice sort of sandwich between both?
Without being too cliche, Jeremy, it was a realisation across the business at a uniform point in time. I wouldn't say there was a particular lead as such. Certainly, it garnered the attention. The performance was garnering the attention of quite a few parties for various different reasons. Certainly, right from the top of the business through to the field teams, and also from our customers as well. We were seeing some complaints on the rise, and we definitely wanted to make sure that we were investigating them thoroughly. And certainly when we dug in, we realised, yeah, there is some work to be done here.
So when you're saying complaints, were they like, I guess, the driver performance of the organisation down the road, or was it power, or once again, where does that marriage sort of sit there?
Coming across in numerous different forms, definitely mixed up, and quite often the complaints were not universal one, but certainly appearance, performance, reliability, and certainly when it came to a major event, when we started having impacts towards returning power as a result of some of our fleet performance, that was where we had to get in and do some work.
And is it a difficult thing to balance the mass of the vehicle and trying to get everything on there and restoring power?
Yes, that's something that's quite unique, and we refer to this quite often inside our business, where the primary design function of our assets as such is actually not road transport. The primary design function of our assets is to service and maintain highly specialised electrical infrastructure. And they have a secondary design function, which is to mobilise and demobilise from the job site as such. That should not be heard as the secondary and primary as some sort of hierarchical relationship with importance. They're both equally important. Without either of those functions, the asset is defective. But certainly when it comes to designing an asset and making sure that asset is fit for purpose, we need to pay credence to both sides of it. And certainly vehicle mass is one that gets a lot of airtime across our organisation. Naturally, we're carrying very specialist equipment. Quite often, we're going into very remote regions, which means we have to carry some comms gear, and particularly stuff to sustain us while we're there as well. So, freeboard and mass on vehicles is obviously something that we do a lot of.
Great. Question here from Chris: what is the longest distance that a crew would be required to travel from home base?
I don't have, to disappoint Chris, I don't have a statistical number, but I would say there is. So we do, if we look back at that slide, that is a little bit about who we are. I won't flick back to it, but it talks about some of our longest feeder lines, which are well over 1,000 kilometres in length. Those we do have to patrol those lines if there is a failure, and our crews will obviously partner up and certainly move down that line from both directions. We do also have travelling crews, which do spend a bit of time on the road, staying at different locations, and certainly attending, particularly major events, attending in numbers as such. So sorry, I don't have a statistical answer, but quite routinely plus 100 kilometres from the base.
Great. And question here from Brad: how do you ensure vehicles are kept within GVM weights? Do you have a weighing facility at depots?
We don't have fixed weighing facilities, Jeremy, but what we do have inside the fleet division is we have a number of portable scales. We have a weighing regime with those, both randomised and planned. The intention of both weighing programs, certainly randomised, is around absolute verification, and the planned weighing particularly helps us as a fleet division understand if we are designing assets that are suitable for what we need to. If we see them quite often pushing up towards the freeboard limit of that asset, then certainly we need to start thinking about what we're doing, because that means that we're asking the operator to really push it.
And what about crew weight mass as well? Is that a bit of an issue?
Crew mass, yes, it's unfortunately, the world is not a vacuum. I'd love it if it was, but certainly crew mass can be quite interesting. You know, when we isolate the human and essential PPE versus PPE that would be required for specialist duties or for such things as fuel and water. That goes up and down. So we tend to talk about freeboard in isolation, as this is the total carrying capacity of the vehicle as such, rather than actually trying to break it down to, or try and standardise something that is virtually impossible to standardise.
Just before we move on, the last question here from Caroline before you delve back into it. When you started the review, did you bring in external parties to help investigate?
Yes, we did, Caroline, and certainly a feature throughout this presentation as such, and the discussion we'll have today is certainly that by no means am I sitting here professing that we're experts at this. We did actually bring in experts with a wide ranging experience and background, and certainly an area here is that we actually looked much further than the fleet management space as such, and actually started to look into more broadly asset management as a discipline, and starting to look at essentially what is a portfolio of high risk, high performance assets that is geographically sparse and not linked, not truncated. That's a complex asset portfolio to look after. So we need to go and find people that can help us with this. So yes, we did bring in external helpers.
And that helped quite a bit?
Yes, it did. The review confirmed, as with all good reviews, sort of, you start to draw towards the root cause nice and early in the piece, and the review absolutely confirmed what the anecdotal things we were seeing were real. We needed to do some work with it. We actually did for the transformation program as such, which we'll talk a little bit about in a moment. We actually did partner with an external organisation as well to help us deliver that. So yeah, absolutely would firmly advise of that. That being said, obviously I use the word partnership there not lightly, that it is absolutely a partnership, and certainly one of the more famous sayings is that we can outsource tasks, but we cannot outsource risk. And from that perspective, Essential Energy absolutely operates its fleet, and we will continue to manage it that way. So,
excellent. Well, let's move on, shall we?
Okay, so management of assets as such across an asset life cycle. This has been broken down into four stages, and these are the 4 life cycle stages that we use at Essential Energy. And we started with design for a purpose, or identify and design. So this is where I was talking a little further, a little earlier rather, around the design. The design of our assets is unique by virtue of what we need to do with them. So that means we have to rise to the challenge as such. Building and preparing the assets in that life cycle phase, particularly, it's really important. To A, make sure that it's a very high quality asset that enters service, and B, it has all the supporting information and support structures around it to support it through its operate and maintain life cycle phase, which, if you look at this infographic as such, is obviously not in scale, because the operate and maintain life cycle phase is quite often greater than 2/3 as such of a life cycle. And then the important thing, particularly at the end, is to invest and renew wisely. Certainly there was a number of findings within Essential, and one of the bigger findings was that when we retired an asset as such, or we renewed the asset as such, we would quite often not actually look back and really understand how that asset's gone from in comparison to every single stakeholder's expectations. And across that performance and risk as well. So we've done a lot of work in there. Underpinning all of it is a customer focus. There is absolutely no point in managing an asset if it doesn't fulfil the customer's needs. That's a fairly benign statement, but absolutely rings true in every business. So we must keep that at the centre.
How do you measure that?
We'll get into that
very soon.
On each slide. There's numerous measures, but yeah, certainly we'll get into stage measures as such. So we'll step through each of the phases now, and I'm going to link this back to a few of the deliverables of the fleet transformation project at Essential Energy, and I'm happy to take questions on any of these at any point in time. Certainly, when we talk about designing an asset for purpose, this is quite a comical conversation that I had at one point in time, where whereas we were talking with a group of individuals, and we were talking about what asset we needed, and it was really interesting that the group was talking to me around not only the asset they needed, but the brand, the model, right down to the configuration. And when we actually stepped back and we realized that asset, brand, model, configuration hadn't actually changed in more than 10 years, but yet quite a lot of our line construction had changed. Certainly a lot of the road legislation had changed quite a lot, and then customers' expectations around our performance in regards to road safety had changed. So in actual fact, we didn't need that asset. We needed something entirely different. So it's really important to get this stage right. There's a few topics on the screen there, particularly design and engineering reviews. That's actually a stress model analysis of one of our pole trailers, which when we look at that stress model, that's obviously not immediately apparent when you're out in the field, but certainly there's a number of stress concentrations there that would cause issues when it's driving down the road. Particularly across on the right hand side of that slide, it talks about a Rambo options assessment methodology, which is industry understood options assessment, which is reliability, availability, maintainability, buildability, and operability. So there's a lot of abilities in there. But it's essentially an evaluation technique that involves all stakeholders, and it evaluates things. It evaluates different options as such across the entire life cycle and performance. So it does take into account both statistical and tangible measurements, and also intangibles, which could be something as operator comfort would be one that would have a little bit of emotion attached to it, but equally has a massive bearing on operator fatigue. So certainly something that we look at, and you can see there some of the design criteria, selection criteria that that talks about that Rambo analysis.
And what about, you mentioned harsh conditions, and there's quite a variety within Queensland. Do you have to have certain vehicles for very specific conditions, or can you get a one size fits all?
Yeah, we're in New South Wales, and we do part of southeast Queensland as well, Jeremy. One size fits all is a very dangerous term. Certainly, when I think of our franchise area, if we just isolate for environmental conditions, we range from everything from sub-zeros and snows all the way through to flat, hot, and really pushing things quite hard. We do endeavour wherever possible to standardise, and that largely comes with scale of efficiency benefits, but equally also comes, and this is a really good part about standardisation, is it allows rapid application of learnings across different asset models. So it is very, very handy, particularly when we talk about a safety improvement. If you have standardisation across a fleet, it can absolutely make a difference. However, as standardisation as a topic is definitely not binary. It's not either standardised or bespoke. There's a whole spectrum in there, and making sure we land right on that spectrum is really, really important. And certainly, if I think of our light vehicle classes, our light commercial vehicles, we do have an element of bespoke asset design. Whereas if I think of something that would be highly regulated, such as a crane, much more standardised as such. So there's not a universal answer to that question, but absolutely something that needs to be done with intent.
And you mentioned sharing across your workforce. How do you achieve that?
With great endeavour. Sharing of assets, or driving up performance of assets naturally drives up utilisation as such. And certainly, we all know that certainly underutilised assets, on top of being a burden to the business financially, they're also a massive burden to the business from a risk perspective. So much harder to control, and quite often don't receive the care and attention that they should to make sure that it's there. So how do we drive it up across our business? Certainly talking to teams about the benefits of the asset classes, certainly sharing the information that we obtain around the assets, and where assets could be used better. Classic here would be when we look at, and I talked about a little earlier around primary and secondary design functions. If we take a crane, for example, primary design function of a crane is to have its boom in the air and lifting loads. Secondary design function is to transport itself to and from site. And as I say, that does not refer to to importance. It's just a function. Areas where we see a high travel and low effective utilisation, which would be boom in the air, that's normally a sign that we've got the asset stationed in the incorrect location, particularly for a short period. So we can provide coaching and counsel on that, and so maybe we should move this asset close to this base for this period. Certainly aligning with work programs and things and such as alike is very, very important.
Because simple measure there, boom in the air, it's generating revenue. Travel, it's costing. Would that be fair?
Yeah, that's a fair measure. It's not quite as binary as that, because quite often it can be a combination of both, particularly when they may be carting materials out or doing something like that. So
okay.
It does get a little more complex than that, but certainly as an overriding principle, the more time that we can be on the pole as such, the lower risk we provide to our customers, because it means there's kilograms off the road, which is important for road safety. And then on top of that, we're also providing our customers with better service, ergo that we'll be delivering on high reliable, low cost power provision. So.
And we've got a query on clarification here from Caroline. When you talk about customers, are you also referring to employees?
Yes, I would refer to them as stakeholders, but absolutely being stakeholders of the business, but absolutely it's not lost on anyone in the business that across our footprint, every single one of our workers also consumes power off the network. So by virtue of that, they absolutely are customers as well.
And one last question before we move on, next slide. From Corey. From a specialised vehicle design perspective, loaded mass is probably not as important as centre of gravity with four-wheel drive trucks mounted with elevated work platforms. Are the driving operator limits adjusted based upon a vehicle dynamics and weight distribution?
Yeah, centre of gravity conversations are really interesting, particularly when you're talking about the truck itself performing its duty in mobilisation versus a truck itself performing its duty stand and access. So certainly four-wheel drive trucks, absolutely agree with Corey that a higher centre of gravity is definitely not where we need to be. Certainly the axle mass limitations of four-wheel drive trucks as well cause issues. Particularly when we start to get into larger EWPs, and certainly we're seeing across our business a push away from four-wheel drive trucks for that reason, and primarily it's around the actual loading, safe operation of the trucks as such, and equally as well where we need an asset that requires that amount of access. Can we do it another way? That's a really important question to ask. A little bit of planning or potentially revising the work we have to do, or how we're going to access it, or how we're even going to do that work can be a really enlightening conversation.
Good question, great answer.
Very good. So built to a higher standard, this is certainly something that is very close to many of our hearts, the hour being the royal hour, all of ours. Certainly when I talk about particularly building, we talk about, and I'll pick on a light commercial vehicle, given that there's a photo of four of them as such there, or three and one low class truck. When we talk about those vehicles, it's very, very easy to jump to the conclusion that certainly an OEM has made that vehicle, i.e. Ford or Toyota or Mercedes has built that vehicle. It's actually a faux pas in the way that quite often there's a lot of customization that's done to these vehicles, particularly when we start talking about service bodies. So when we start to at least at times up to 1/3 of the design can actually be custom build and actually spread across 3 or 4 parties in the design and construction phase, which creates a bit of a problem when you get to the end of it, because quality assurance becomes really complex. And certainly this is an area where throughout the fleet transformation program that we're running, we know it internally as a fleet improvement program, or FLIP as an acronym. When we talk about FLIP, one of the best things that we've established is a planning and engineering function, in the way that the build and quality assurance systems are actually managed by Essential Energy, that we own the assets, and so we may not be the experts at every single part of that build, but certainly we will make sure that the assurance systems are there to make sure that the assets are up to our expectation and continue to perform across. Delivery and handover controls. This is something that's that we've actually brought from across industries, and certainly there's a couple of different inspections that we use quite frequently. One being a factory acceptance test, or a FAT. Factory acceptance testing reviews scope and looks at as built as compared to scope as such. So that's delivery. That would be what we normally call a pre-delivery. We've implemented an additional control, which is actually called a site acceptance test, which is SAT. And site acceptance testing is very, very important, because no longer are you talking about scope as such for the asset or the asset design. We're now talking about what it actually has to do when it enters service. And quite often there can be a delta between those two. So making sure, I've also heard this colloquially referred to as shakedown. This is something that's very, very important, because if it enters, once that asset enters service, the risk is owned by the operating organisation. So certainly during a SAT inspection, we'll go over and we'll make sure that the asset completely performs as functioned and it's baselined. Also, it's got all the supporting information. The training and assessment, or less so assessment, more so training and handover is very important to us. So we definitely give a lot of support there. And the vision down in the bottom corner there shows one of the trucks going through exactly that. So,
yeah, where does the work, like how much involvement do you have the guys who are actually out at the coalface doing it? Are they quite a core part, or do you have a select group? How do you involve them in this sort of part?
Yeah, stakeholder involvement during design and build is very, very important. It's actually a really great engagement tool, in the way that certainly at key milestones during a build, if you can involve particularly end users of the asset, it really engages them in the process. Definitely allows them to help you highlight things before you progress down the line, and actually send yourself walking down a line that you're mistakenly calling progress. Yeah, it's really, really important. And certainly, there's key milestone points right up until the delivery, where the asset enters service, which is very, very important.
Have there been any key sort of eureka moments on some of the designs when you've gone, geez, that's a really good idea?
Yeah, there's I'm thinking back to, there's quite a few. When I'm trying to think of one that would be quite unique. The image on the screen there, we can talk about that. That's actually a small fleet of vehicles we refer to as our concept fleet. For those on the call that attended the fleet safety day at Tamworth for Essential Energy the other day would have actually seen these. That's actually a really good orientation, where we actually we designed those 4 vehicles, and there was actually another 2 where we actually picked the vehicles out, and we said, okay, we want to do a radical design change here. So we brought in some third parties, some people that knew. We do not operate under the assumption that we are good bodybuilders. We're an electrical company, and we're okay with that. We brought in some really good bodybuilders. We also engaged with the OEMs of the motor vehicles as such, and got the stakeholders involved, and actually said, okay, in this case, we've got X amount of kilos that we can use. What do we want to use it for? And we actually did a ground up build. Those vehicles actually spent quite a lot of time touring around our franchise area as such, and delivering a lot of road safety messages, particularly around mass, and allowing people to actually have a really, really good review. That those vehicles there are actually version 2 of those vehicles. So we've been able to, that radical design change has obviously been implemented into our fleet, but equally, as they've gone around, there's lots and lots of little things that people have actually mentioned to us. Can we look at this? Can we look at that? One of the bigger ones that particularly people that were with these vehicles quite frequently was that naturally every human's different. Every human has a bias of such, whether it be to a certain type of tools or a certain type of lunch. There's always a bias. And what we found was, certainly, while the skeleton of the vehicle we could get reasonable consensus on, the internals were quite emotive, very emotive. And so what we've actually been able to do is fashion in quite a lot of what we would term end user customization. So, and quite simply, this is the internals of the vehicle, particularly in the load bearing part of the vehicle, are unboltable. So you can actually bolt shelves in and shift the heights around and that sort of stuff. And obviously we design in so that things so that we can't have something put in an unsafe way into the cab. So load security is very important, but allowing end users to actually customize to suit what they need to carry and their challenges in life and at work has been great. It's stopped unauthorized modification. It's definitely limited. I won't go as far as saying stopped. That's maybe a wish, but it's certainly that would be a eureka moment, Jerem, that was really important to us.
Do you find sometimes are you concerned that the vehicle safety features might be like some of the ABS or any of those sort of things? Is there any of a concern around how that might influence it, or is that all part of the testing as well?
No, so generally the cab and the safety features across the vehicles we do not modify at all. We do operate mass upgrades on some of our vehicles. We also, the frontal protection across Essential Energy is all now polycarbonate. We don't use any steel for that exact same reason. So wherever possible, we'll protect the integrity and the safety orientation of that vehicle. The large amount of end user customization is actually in the load bearing and load handling as such. So
great,
very good. So delivers results in life at the end of the day. If we're all going to manage an asset for the needs of our customers, we better deliver the results on it, right? So this is where it all pays off, and certainly a massive part of the fleet improvement program at Essential Energy has been the operate and maintain phase. So certainly coming aboard, one of the things that I was quite, I'll use the word concerned about, was the amount of different parties with very specialist knowledge that needed to touch our equipment. The photo in the bottom of this slide is actually a very real outage for us, and this was obviously a capital upgrade, but it just shows the various assets that we do operate. And when you think of say a highly technical EWP, it's obviously got a hydraulic system. It's also a truck. It's also got electrical limitations on it, and then pressure related systems as well. So it's quite a number of different elements there, and we were seeing quite frequently that our assets had to go to numerous service providers to get this work completed, which naturally increases risk. Every time we're tampering with an asset, there's a risk increase.
How do you find that though, for a country like with a big country base, and how do you actually make sure you can get it back to those service providers if you say way out somewhere in New South Wales?
Yeah, and that was quite a challenge, because we were actually operating our fleet services through an intermediary party, which was not working at the time, was not working in the best interest of the end service providers, as you say, the mum and dad shops in the back end of the country, and also wasn't working for us. So we had to really look at that, and certainly when we term that at the moment, it really was a structural incapacity that we were trying to work through. So the re-establishment of in-field and technical support for our business has been instrumental. The in-field technical support for us takes shape of three service facilities. So we do have the three. There's three based across the state. However, given the geographical challenges that we face, we run mobile service facilities out of those. So that little service truck there is one of the ones that rips around the state, and a lot of the, call them annoying problems or smaller problems, can be dealt with in the field, and certainly statutory inspections can be done out of that truck as well. So we're able to provide in-field service. And then where we're moving to as a business is we will have roadable assets that we can actually pull. So if an asset has a defect that can't be repaired, or is in for a planned service and it needs to come out of service, we will rotate in a roadable asset for it, and then we'll be able to repair it. So getting that functionality back inside of our business has been vitally important for us. Naturally, a big part of this is, the next question is, well, how do we know? How do we know what work needs to be done on the assets as such? And this started 18 months ago, where we actually looked at, the answer to that question is naturally some sort of end user inspection, of which which we're all familiar with, and certainly the inspections that we had been using in Essential Energy have been largely paper orientated. They've been largely following what I would call a draconian administrative function, which meant that there was quite a lag from the defect to notification as such without exiting system, i.e. someone calling someone, of which we're relying on a knowledge network, which is not great. So this led to the establishment of what we know as FIAS, which is our Fleet Inspection and Auditing System. We all love a good acronym. The vision of FIAS as such is certainly certainly something that bothered me when I first started. Was we tend to, when we deliver an asset, if we deliver that asset in 2015 to pick a number, quite often we'll retire that asset, and out of the glove box we'll pull out 2015 information. So the vision of FIAS was absolutely to get to a point at which there was nil need for paperwork, physical paperwork in the car, and certainly through access through a QR code, which we place under the driver's side mirror, anyone within our business, any operator, would be able to not only perform a pre-start or report a defect, but also have a look at the condition of that asset, also access any documents, any support, anything they need while they're there as well. And that's essentially our customer interface system. That was important to be developed first. That's why we started 18 months ago. That is now being linked back into our fleet asset management system, which will control our workshop work, control our planned maintenance, and so on and so forth. So it's been an instrumental system. We found value in ways that we never really conceived. A really great example of this is actually used in the case study, where we actually had a partial recall of some particular items. So not the vehicle as such, but some items that were fitted to some of our light commercial vehicles, and we were quite quickly able to actually understand which of these vehicles were by VIN number. Really a great piece of the FIAS system was we were able to push a defect to all of those assets using the back-end systems functionality. So anyone that actually started work that morning, as soon as I went to scan the QR code and complete their pre-start, they got a nice big notice. So
do you want to explain about how the QR code fits into this?
Yes, yep. So we're an iDevice enabled company, so we all carry an iDevice. Certainly my iPhone, which is sitting on this table right in front of me, if I was starting my shift, I could go to an EE vehicle, open up the FIAS app, and scan the QR code, and it would bring up all the details on that asset. So it's a way to access the system as such.
And so with that mobile device, what happens when someone's driving in their car, the workers? What's your sort of approach and policy around that, the driver distraction question?
Yes, so we do have cradles for mobile phones as such, and they're definitely designed and fitted to the vehicles to provide the occupant the comfort of having the phone there. Obviously connects through to the various different Bluetooth systems. Certainly we don't mount any pads or anything to cabs and dashboards as such, mainly due to airbag encroachment issues. But certainly and ideally, I would not like to think we've got anyone doing a pre-start while they're driving the vehicle, that's for sure.
Question here from Caroline. Can you tell us about telematics systems you use and what features are utilised? And a second question, that how many, I've already answered the one, and how many assets in the fleet? I shot it through and said it's 3,500 mobile assets.
Cool. I was leaving IVMS. So in-vehicle monitoring systems are certainly, it's something that we're implementing right now. So this project had been underway when I first started with Essential Energy. It definitely didn't have a clear vision as such. We weren't really sure on what we were aiming to do with it. There was a lot. I think it would be everyone on this webinar would absolutely agree with the statement that it's a drenched field, and there's lots of people offering lots of things that sound really, really good. We were in the midst of our fleet transformation program, and one of the things that we did do was we partnered with an external firm, the same external firm, helping us with fleet transformation, and actually really pared back what we really wanted to achieve with our in-vehicle monitoring systems. And what we got back to was certainly improving driver behaviour by virtue of lowering risk, and improving our ability to respond immediately in a duress event. So they're the two business objectives of the project, and we've stuck really, really closely to those. When we started looking at particular systems, once again, we're not IVMS experts, so we engaged with market, and there was numerous marketing, upwards of 20 different people, different companies involved with lots of different systems. However, what we found particularly was when we started to talk around how do we improve driver behaviour, a lot of the things that were being offered actually didn't do much for that. We actually had quite a pivotal conversation where we were talking around an in-vehicle speedometer with variance to speed limit, and we were talking. We were in a workshop, and we were talking about it will help reduce driver behaviour by immediately providing feedback in variance to speed, which is true. But then when we really started to challenge ourselves, there is a speedo in the car. It's there. It's reasonable that you should know where it is, given motor vehicle manufacturers spend a lot of time designing the dashes. Far be it from us to understand how to design them better. Then we started to actually unpack it further, and we realised the confusion that comes from the natural biases in the vehicle fitted speedometer and the GPS speedometer. I'm not going to get into the argument now which is more accurate. That's for another time. But certainly, nothing short of than measuring something twice that you'll get two different measurements. And that was exactly what was happening. It was actually causing more driver distraction. So we really challenged ourselves on that. We realized that actually wasn't going to help with driver behavior. It was actually going to be counter. So we've gone away from that entirely. There's a whole range of different stuff with our IVMS program and I'm happy to field any calls from anyone to talk about it, but it's certainly been an eye-opening journey. We are implementing at the moment. It is naturally implementing an IVMS program. It is interesting, interesting being a very interesting word, and we're getting lots and lots of fun out of it. But certainly with those two key business objectives in mind, we will achieve those when we stick very, very closely to them. Because the other caution that I would provide, in my humble experience with in-vehicle monitoring systems, is that the little word called scope creep features pretty high. There's a lot of people that start to...
And that's an expensive one as well, yeah?
Yeah. And certainly what the flip side of the scope creep coin is that obviously it hampers the ability for a project to deliver well. So yeah, certainly keeping top on that, it's nice.
And I'd recommend check out the Southern Cross Protection webinar we did I think it was in August with Claire, and she's had some great input into that as well. So one question here from Susan: Can staff access other information, e.g. road safety messaging, via the QR code?
It's a really good question, Susan. At this point, no, it's we haven't delved into that, but suffice to say, you've just contributed to the fleet transformation program at Essential Energy.
We love it being constructive. And one last thing, so if other organisations want to be able to use this app or borrow or take some of these ideas, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we once again we're a great distribution network service provider. We're not a great IT company. However, we did develop the app internally, and it gives us an amazing level of customization. Certainly we're happy to share the work we've done on it. I must temper this in saying that it won't be something you can download from the Apple Store or from Android Store and jump on. It needs a fair amount of work. We're certainly happy to share anything we've done in this space. So
it's always fantastic to hear people willing to share.
Very good. Closing out the asset life cycle as such, and some of the earlier deliverables of the fleet improvement program, and there's a lot of data on this slide, and it's hard to read, but we certainly, when we talk about managing mobile assets, or managing any asset, one of the first things we need to be aware of is it needs to have a life plan, and we need to be able to manage and measure variance to that life plan, particularly across key areas of cost, risk, and performance. So certainly there's a screenshot there of what we call the asset dashboard that can be filtered down by asset classes and a whole bunch of stuff in it. and it talks about performance cost and risk as separate items, and we can start to balance assets off against their life plan as such, which is really important, because when we're talking about assets with a 5, 10, 15 year design life, if it gets to year N, call N7, if it gets to year 7 and it's been performing with a massive variance to that life plan, then certainly at times it would make no sense to continue to operate that asset. It likely isn't servicing your customer needs, and ergo needs to move on. So certainly renewing investing certainly hinges on data, but also needs a lot of stakeholder input. So you can see there we've actually got a break-even analysis of a rent versus buy that we did inside our company, where we had a group come to us and they actually informed us as a team that we spend quite a lot of time and effort hiring this particular piece of the plant, the specialised piece of plant, and we actually looked at, okay, well, let's have a look at what we spend, what it offers our business, and see if we can do it a different way. In this case, we found another way to go about that. But certainly, data is the kingpin of this, of renewed with intelligence. And as cliche as it is, being at the end of the asset life cycle, it actually happens every single day across the life cycle, and particularly when you get to milestone events for a midlife overhaul or some sort of intervention that has a chronological stamping. So certainly a common one at the moment is 10-year statutory inspections. All of this feeds into portfolio-wide planning. So this is certainly where when we start to talk about what is a complex asset portfolio of assets that are not interlinked, we need to be viewing it as a portfolio as such. And certainly at Essential Energy, one of the things that we're actually actively working on at the moment is, and we touched on the discussion earlier around freeboard on vehicles. Certainly when you think the fixed operating mass of a vehicle, i.e. the tyres, engine, brakes, chassis, that sort of stuff, that fixed operating mass you've got to put on the road anyway, and the amount of freeboard we can put on that vehicle is very, very important. We need to be maximising that at all times. Certainly when I started, one of the things that we were talking a lot about was a term of retrucking, which is taking service bodies off vehicles at the end of life of a nominated period, be it 4, 5, 6 years, and actually moving those onto a second LCV with the idea of improving its length of service, ergo lowering its unit cost. When we actually step back from that and we say, okay, well, what's the trade-offs? There's always a trade-off there. And one of the bigger trade-offs that we found was certainly to build a piece of an asset that can survive twice its life cycle. The trade-off is mass. And so what we were having to build was very heavy service bodies, which then remove freeboard, which is what our customer needed. And as a result, we were designing assets that actually didn't fulfill the purpose. So now we've been able to actually pare those back and return those benefits, in this case, to our stakeholder, which is the operator of the vehicle, which better serves our customer needs. So that's a really smart one, where we actually sat back at the end of life and asked people how they were going, and everyone said to us, look, they're great vehicles, but we just can't put anything on them. And we think, oh, that's really cool. Let's unpack that. Let's have a good conversation around that.
You built a nice tank and you can put any ammo in it at all. Yeah,
and certainly this gets into a discussion around heavy vehicles versus light vehicles. Certainly one that gets a lot of discussion in the forums that I've been a part of. Certainly the trade-off there is operability. Operability of light commercial vehicles certainly surpasses heavy commercials. Flip side of that same coin is the fit for purpose design, in the way that heavy commercials absolutely have a better freeboard and have been designed to carry that freeboard, versus light commercials that are not, generally are not designed to operate at 100% axle mass all day long. Really interesting trade-off. I'd love to have an answer to that question that I could provide everyone today, and we could run away and deal with that. Unfortunately, the world is not a vacuum, so it's an ongoing discussion.
Excellent. Now we're going to be opening it up for questions. So, and I got a good one here to start from Corey. Would love to know how they deal with fatigue. Obviously, with a high risk, high focus task, at work location, mental fatigue must be an issue, particularly driving to and return from work. What does the hours of service policy look like, and how does it take into account work drive and then presumably drive from home, from base to home? So the old fatigue nugget for you. And then you also got the 24-hour, like if things go down, what happens?
Yeah. Fatigue. Fatigue's a really, really interesting topic. And it's really, really interesting because there's, to use an engineering term, there's essentially no datum in the way that humans react to every single thing differently. There's actually, I refer back to the case study, there's actually a statement in there that I love using all the time, which is that legislation is there to keep bad people honest. However, great companies are going far, far further than that. Certainly that's my approach with fatigue as well, that certainly there is, and I'll go to heavy vehicles here as the example, that there's quite draconian processes in place with very paper orientated systems that are there as the backstop. But if you're a great business, you're going a lot further than that. And certainly an example of that at Essential is within the FIRES app. There is actually, when you're going through your pre-start, it actually does ask you if you're traveling more than 2 hours, and if you answer yes to that question, there's a series of follow-up questions, which I think there's 3 or 4 where it talks about have you got a journey plan, have you planned in your breaks, and does someone know you're going to arrive? Now, certainly those 3 questions are immensely powerful. That is important to start the conversation. So far as work particularly, that's a really, really interesting one in the way that, and anyone that's waded into to the way transport laws are structured versus WHS laws, it's very, very interesting to say the least. But there's a daylight gap between the two, and we need to be managing better than that. So certainly a big one for us is storm and bushfire season. Certainly the job starts. The job starts when we start to mobilise. That's the most important thing to remember, and it's something that we hammer home across our entire business. And certainly when we've got mobilised crews on to and from or starting from home, it's known across our business as to and from. That can be a little bit more difficult to manage. It has helped a lot having tools such as FIRES there that we can, the time and date stamp, so we can see it. It's a really interesting discussion to get into, because where that starting from base of home benefits both the individual and the business, we should absolutely be leaping at it every single time. However, it does mean that we have to work harder to make sure that we're managing fatigue appropriately, given that the operator and equally myself, the last person that knows I'm fatigued is me. So we absolutely have to have. Are we perfect at it? No. Certainly always happy to hear different ideas and such, but a lot of the approach certainly at Essential has been empowerment of employees, education particularly.
So they actually understand the risk and what sleep means and why it matters.
Yeah, and moving away from risk-orientated prevention type systems.
Great. Last question here from Bajorna. How do you measure risk? What are the parameters used in the dashboard report?
Risk is the really fun one to manage. There's a whole bunch of different risk measures. Certainly, one of the more popular would be an internationally recognised measure, which is mean time between failure. We certainly know that a highly reliable plant is a safe plant, because when we talk about the science of reliability, it is quite simply removing or limiting unwanted outcomes, which is essentially risk management by definition. So if we're managing the both well, both performance indices will go up. There's certainly another great one for risk is mean time to repair. So when we have something happen, how quickly are we repairing it and putting it back into operational service, whether that be a safety orientated device, or it could simply be asset health related. So we know that discretionary care comes with higher quality assets as well. There's a whole bunch of other risk metrics as well, certainly around operation,
Driver behaviour.
yeah, percentage of time in design, stuff like that. So yeah, there's lots. There's no one, but yeah, what's in there.
Excellent. Well, sadly, we've run out of time. If you can go to the final slide, thank you, Chris. And want to ask everyone, please do register for our newsletter. You can go here. You can check out our Toolbox Talks as well. This is the posters from the new Road Rage series, which has just been released. I'd like to say a big thank you to Chris for coming all the way down and joining me in the studio today. It's been a fantastic discussion. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Jerome.
And to everyone out there, especially to our audience, for shooting through those questions and making it as interactive as possible. It all resonates and makes it an enjoyable conversation, but our hours is up, and I'll look forward to you joining us in the future with future webinars. So thank you from me.
Thanks, Jerome. Thanks, everybody.
And have a lovely day. Thank you all.